Hey, this weekend, we were continuing a series called The Company of Christ, and the sermon was called The Radical Way. And in the message, we explored three different stories, three different episodes. And the challenge I experienced in preparing was that one of those episodes, a group called the Pharisees, they approached Jesus and they asked this question about divorce. And Jesus' response just provided some really rich and deep insight into what God intended marriage to be. But again, that was one of three different stories or episodes, and I just didn't feel that I was going to be able to give adequate time to explore Jesus' teachings and the implications of those teachings in this critical area of life. And so just decided to film a second video, kind of some bonus content, drilling deeper into what Jesus was teaching in Mark chapter 10 on the topic of marriage. Now, as you watch this today, it's possible you're watching it and you're married and things are going fairly smoothly, and you might just find this informational, maybe informative, and maybe just a little encouraging or a bit inspiring. There's also the possibility that you're watching this today and you feel absolutely lost, deeply discouraged, and maybe even at a point of despair. And so as we have this conversation, I just ask that our gracious God would be pleased to bring direction and to bring hope in whatever situation you find yourself in. Now, I think context is important here. That is, when does this conversation on divorce and marriage take place? And Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem with the disciples. They were way up north in Galilee, and he's traveling south to Jerusalem, and he's going to die there. This is where he will give up his life for us at the crucifixion. But in this section, in Mark chapter 8, Mark chapter 9, and Mark chapter 10, three different times, Jesus explains to his disciples what is going to happen in Jerusalem. So you have a passion prediction. We're going to Jerusalem and I'm going to die there. One of those is in chapter 8, one of those is in chapter 9, and one of those is in chapter 10. This conversation that takes place about marriage is between passion prediction number 2 and number 3. And this is so critical because Jesus is not only talking about his death and his resurrection, Jesus is beginning to train his disciples in what it means to live, and the term that we've used is the cruciform life, what it means to have a life that is cross-shaped, a life that is marked by sacrifice, and a life that is marked by humility. And so this is the overarching context. So it's not like one day Jesus sat down with his disciples and says, let's talk about marriage today. No, they are on the way to Jerusalem where he will give his life, and he's training them in how to live the cross-shaped life. And so already, if you're kind of guessing that his conversation will have something to do with humility and sacrifice, you've guessed correctly. So let's take a few minutes and let's explore this episode together when the Pharisees come to Jesus and ask him a question about divorce. Mark chapter 10, verse 2, it just says some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Is it legal for a man to divorce his wife? But it says that they came and they tested him. It's like they're setting a trap for him. Now, this conversation takes place near the Jordan River. I think it's about that place where John the Baptist had been baptizing people. And John the Baptist ends up getting executed because there's a ruler by the name of Herod the Tetrarch. And John the Baptist called out Herod for stealing his brother's wife and marrying her. John got killed over this incident. And so I think when the Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, tell us, we just have a little question. Is it legal for a man to divorce his wife? What they might be able to do here, if Jesus says, no, it's absolutely illegal, is to run off to Herod the Tetrarch and get Jesus in the same trouble that John the Baptist found himself in. And so in this case, the Pharisees won't have to try to figure out how to kill Jesus. Herod the Tetrarch might end up doing it for them. So they're laying a trap here. Is it legal for a man to divorce his wife? And they're waiting for an answer. And Jesus doesn't answer. Well, he answers their question by asking a question. And his question is just this. He said, what did Moses command you? What did Moses say? Now, Moses is credited with like the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the books of Moses. And so they've got a lot of material from which to answer. But what they pick as their answer is Deuteronomy chapter 24. It says, they said, Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her on her way. And send her away. So what did Moses command? Well, Moses said you could write a certificate of divorce and send her packing. Now that Deuteronomy chapter 24 passage is critical because Moses wasn't commanding divorce. He wasn't encouraging divorce. He wasn't promoting divorce. I think that Moses was just recognizing that in a fallen and broken world with fallen and broken people, divorce was going to happen. And he attempted to set some parameters around the way in which a divorce happened. And I think what's going on in Deuteronomy 24 is that certificate of divorce thing was for the protection of the woman. I mean, you can't just dump your wife and send her out into the street. She can now not go into the house of another husband to receive protection, provision, and shelter because she still has married status. Legally, she's still married to you. And so in order for the protection of the woman, in order for the wife to find a new shelter, a new provider, a new caregiver, they needed to make the divorce legal. That's, I think, what this certificate is about. And Jesus, he gets right to the heart of it where he goes, it is because your hearts were hard that Moses made, it was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law. He said, no, this happened because of hard-heartedness. Now, what happens here is that Jesus also now quotes from the books of Moses. But rather than choosing Deuteronomy, he goes way back to the beginning of our Bible. Verses that you would find on the first page or the first couple pages of your Bible. Jesus cites the creation story kind of before the fall of humanity, before sin enters the world, before there were broken hearts, before there were broken marriages, before there were broken families. Jesus says, okay, what did God intend then? What did the Creator design? And so Jesus quotes from Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. He says, but at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. The word that I want you to focus on here is just the word oneness. I think it's so critical. I think it's so important because often in marriage, my highest goal is my happiness. And God designed this thing for something called oneness. Jesus continues. He says, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but they are one. And therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. What God has joined together in oneness, let no one separate. Now, my take on this passage of Scripture is that I don't think here Jesus was attempting to be encyclopedic and say everything about marriage and breakups that satisfies every question we have. Because when we get to this part where it says, therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. I go, yeah, but what if there's abuse? Yeah, but what if there's been a separation? In 6 years she's been away, hasn't filed for divorce, and has no intention of coming back. Yeah, what about that? What about those situations where there's chronic unfaithfulness? I don't think Jesus is attempting here to address any and every situation that might arise. There could be a lot of questions that we have that he's not addressing here. But what he is doing is taking us back to the beginning. At that point, before the fall, before sin enters the planet. And he says, in the beginning, our Creator intended oneness, not brokenness. And so something interesting happens. There's a secondary conversation. Jesus leaves the Pharisees, leaves the crowds. He goes inside a house. And it appears that the disciples, they want to drill down on what he just said about marriage and oneness and the two becoming one. And in the context of the house, the private conversation with the disciples, this is where Jesus drops something that should sound really heavy to us. It says, he answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. So what's going on here? Because a question about divorce has transitioned into a question about marriage and oneness and what the Creator intended. And now all of a sudden, Jesus turns it into a conversation about adultery. So what's going on here? Adultery, or you shall not commit adultery, was one of the big 10, the 10 commandments. To commit adultery is to hook up with somebody else while I'm married to another person, or to hook up with somebody who happens to be married to another person. And so it seems like what was happening in Jesus' day was someone to say, my wife isn't making me happy. And I think she would make me a whole lot happier, but I can't be with her because I'm married, and that would be adultery. So there's an end run around that. Simply dump the person you're married to, write the certificate of divorce, and then hook up with her. And I think when Jesus says here, a man that divorces his wife and marries another is committing adultery, I think what he's saying is all they're doing is using that Bible verse, certificate of divorce thing, to legalize adultery. They're using a Bible verse to justify their selfishness. Now, let that sink in a little bit. I think this is so important for us. Because when I'm ready to walk away from my marriage, when I'm unhappy, when I'm disillusioned, when I think someone could make me happier, this is just so out of concert with God's original intent for oneness, not brokenness. And remember where they are. Jesus is heading with his disciples to Jerusalem, where he will give up his life for us, and he's training them in the cross-shaped life, the life that's marked by humility and the life that's marked by sacrifice. Any conversation we have about oneness, the challenge of oneness, has got to include heavy doses of humility and sacrifice. I just don't think you can pursue truly being one with your spouse without humility, without sacrifice, without pursuing a cruciform marriage. Okay, so let's just talk about the challenge of oneness, because the last thing I want to do today is to make this sound easy. But Jesus' expression there, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. The challenge of oneness means that instead of just being interested about me, I'm now really interested about we, not just me. It's not just 50-50. I think the optimal idea here is two people in a marriage who are both all in. And so this challenge of oneness requiring humility and requiring sacrifice, I just think is really hard, and I think it's getting harder. So let's just talk about the challenges of oneness. There are probably at least a dozen we could point to. Let me just point to four. One challenge to oneness is unrealistic expectations that we have coming into marriage. And the unrealistic expectation that many of us have is that this person will fulfill me, that they will complete me. I just don't think that's going to happen. And so challenge one is unrealistic expectations. Often the dude says, will you marry me? And the woman says, yes. And will you marry me really means, of all the people that I've met so far, I think you will meet my needs better than anybody else could. And when she says yes, often that means, of all the people I've met so far, I think you will meet my needs better than anybody else. There's this counselor by the name of Larry Crabb, and I remember him using the illustration of a tick, like a wood tick out in the woods. A wood tick attaches itself to a dog in order to suck all the nutrients it can from the dog. And Larry Crabb says that in marriage, you have two ticks and no dog. It's like both individuals come trying to receive all of the affirmation, nurturing, and fullness out of the other person. And so I think just the challenge of oneness, it's a challenge of expectations and what we thought this person was going to do for us. A second challenge, and this is kind of a cultural thing, is that from the movies and books, often marriage is shown as the apex of knowing someone. That is, you start to go out, you get to know someone, then you find out about them, and then you decide to continue the relationship anyway. And finally, when you fully, thoroughly, completely know them, then you walk the aisle. Okay, Chris and I, we've been married for 37 years. I am still getting to know her. It has taken every month of our 37-year marriage and 3 years of going out before that to try to get and to know who this person is. See, this is challenge number 2. Even if you've dated for 7 years before you walk the aisle, you are marrying a stranger. And so that morning that you wake up and go, I don't even know this person. I feel like I've married a stranger. You have. Really, the wedding isn't the landing strip. It's the place where you take off in beginning to really know who this person is. So that's just challenge number 2. Challenge number 3, and this is truer to our culture right now than it was 40 years ago, is the access I have to other people that are disheartened, disillusioned, lonely, and bored. What I'm talking about here is access to an old flame. I mean, 40 years ago, if you wanted to try to find out where someone was that you had gone to college with, that had moved away, what they were doing, how they were doing, if they were married, if they were separated, you might need a private detective in order to find out where that person, a mountain of research and letters to find out where that person was. And now 5 minutes on Facebook can bring you in contact with people you used to be connected to. And so it is just a common story today for someone who is lonely and bored to reach out to try to identify someone that they used to go out with who is also lonely and bored. So in this challenge of oneness, I don't think that can be ignored. The fourth challenge is just the epidemic of divorce. I don't know about you, but it just seems as you survey the landscape, it feels like marriages are dropping like flies. And often, and I don't want to oversimplify, but often it's just because someone thought they would be happier doing something else, being with someone else. I'm just not as happy as I could be. And what I just want to suggest is this fourth challenge, the epidemic of divorce, is that if everybody around you is doing something different because they could be happier, you begin to ask, why not me? Maybe I would be happier doing something else as well. What I would like to suggest is that for a follower of Jesus pursuing the cross-shaped life, perhaps the question, could I be happier? Perhaps this should not be the driving question of our lives. Hey, I want to share a conversation with you that took place a few years back in northern Greece. We were doing this filming project in the ruins of Philippi. And our driver's name was Yanni. And he was like, he's the kind of guy that you look at him and you go, I am not messing with that dude. I mean, former military, special services type guy. And so we were about midday and Yanni says, hey, I know a place for lunch. So we climb in the van and we drive up into the hills and we take a turn turn and another turn and then a couple switchbacks and another turn. And we were like in the middle of nowhere. But he took us to this place. There were a couple cottages there that people could stay at. And there was a table that was laid out overlooking the hillside where we sat and had lunch. And it was just, honestly, it was one of the most memorable dining experiences of my life. But then the hostess comes out and Yanni explains to her in Greek, they're speaking in Greek, that, I was a pastor from the United States, I had written some books, and that we were making a video there in northern Greece at Philippi. And she said, oh, there was another pastor that stayed here. He wrote a book too and was making videos. And she runs off to her house to get a copy of the book and to bring it back. And when she came back with the book was Love and Respect, written by my dear friend, Emerson Eggerich. And so people, Mike, our videographer, and Urania, our guy, they took off with Chris to look at something. And I'm sitting there with Yanni, and Yanni goes, oh, what's the book about? He's looking at the title, it says Love and Respect. And I said, well, it's taken from a verse in the Bible that says a husband should love his wife and the wife should respect her husband. Because more often than not, what the wife is looking for is to be loved, and what the dude is looking for is to be respect. And I'm looking at Yanni, former military guy, and he got that desire for respect. And I said, well, let me show you what he does in the book. And I explained the entire book by showing him three graphics. The first is what's called the crazy cycle. And the crazy cycle is couples get on this all the time. Chris and I have been on it hundreds of times. It's like without love, she reacts without respect. And without respect, he reacts without love. So then she reacts without respect. So then he reacts without love. And Yanni and I are sitting at this table looking at this. And he goes, yeah, I get that all too well. And I said, well, that's just one of three pictures. The other picture that I showed him is something called the energizing cycle. And that is, he starts to love her, and that motivates her respect, and her respect motivates his love, and then that love motivates her respect. And so that's called the energizing cycle, where you get off the crazy cycle and you begin to truly energize each other. And then I paused and I said, but that's not the highest level. Now, I'm sitting across from Yanni, and he already beat me to the punchline. He said the highest level is probably when he's loving her before he gets respected. And she's respecting him, even when she's not getting the love that she wants. And this is what Emerson calls the rewarded cycle. His love, regardless of her respect, regardless of his love. And my friends, that is a work of God. When you can show respect when you're not getting what you're wanting, and when you're giving love when you're not giving the respect you feel that you need. Now, Emerson called that the rewarded cycle. I would like to call it something else. Resurrection life. You see, when we seek to approach the person we're married to with humility, and with sacrifice, often our gracious God is pleased to pour out resurrection life, to unleash resurrection life. This, my friends, is the rewarded cycle. When we pursue the way of the cross in a way that allows us to bless and serve and give to the other person, even in those seasons when we're not getting what we deeply want and what we need. Now, for those of you that right now happen to be passing through a season when you're just incredibly unhappy, you feel a little lost, and you're not only disheartened, but you're at the point of despair, I would just like you to have some hope, and I just want to plead with you to hang in there, because often in hanging in there, you find seasons where you break through into a season that is much better. This past week, our dining room table, Chris was sitting there. She was looking at family pictures on her laptop. And this fall, our kids came over and grandkids came over. We took pictures in the backyard. So it was like us and the grandkids and us with all the kids and each family individually. And there was a picture of Chris and I standing here together. And Chris just said, look at them. Look at them. And by that, she just, wasn't saying, look at that picture of us. She was just saying, look at where we are. And we are in a great space. But this is 37 years of marriage so far. And we have passed through several seasons, I would say at least 3 or 4 seasons, that were marked not by extreme happiness, but by profound unhappiness. Seasons when we didn't get each other, when we didn't like each other. Seasons when we had to check in with a counselor because we were just talking past each other and we needed someone to referee and then someone to guide. I guess what I'm trying to say here is if being happy had been the criteria for staying in the marriage, we would have ended our marriage 3 or 4 times and missed out on those sweet seasons that were on the other side when you've broken through that difficult season to get to the better, sweeter season of oneness. And so I just know right now, just some of you are thinking, okay, Jeff, are you saying that if I persevere and if I serve him, that our marriage will flourish? Are you telling me that if I love her like she needs to be loved and seek sacrifice and humility, that our marriage will stay together? I can't promise that. I can't promise that because we can never control the behavior of another person. What they do is largely out of our hands. What I can promise is that this changes you. The cruciform life, living with humility and sacrifice for another person, this changes you. And just as so often, our gracious God, our Father, our Creator, delights in unleashing resurrection life when we seek the way of the cross, when we pursue humility and sacrifice. I don't know what you're experiencing today. And it's possible that as you're watching this, you are in one of the best seasons of your life. And I suspect there's also the possibility that you're watching this today and you feel like things are a mess. And you feel lost, discouraged, exhausted, demoralized. It's possible that you're watching this and you are in a season of deep, deep need. Listen to me. Have hope. Our gracious God specializes in meeting us at our point of deepest need. And so as you follow the Christ, may you experience hope. May you experience the blessing and favor of God. May you come to know His resurrection power. And may you experience His resurrection life.